The doctrine of creation isn't about how things began. It's about why things exist, what holds the world in being. And the Christian belief is that it is the will of God that holds the world in being.
No matter how you think the creation began and the process of the emergence of life occurred, if you're a Christian, you believe that God is mightily hands-on.
And when I stopped being an atheist and became a Christian instead, actually, I found that conversion really brought a new intellectual and spiritual depth to my scientific research. I studied the philosophy of science and began to realize that proof in science was much more complex than I'd realized. And above all, I began to realize that the scientific narrative actually pointed to a deeper narrative, which is that of God Himself.
The scriptures make it very plain that while God does marvels, miraculous marvels, He embeds these marvels in the historical process.
I've heard theologians talk about the account in Genesis in a way in which, however you read the days, whether you read them literally or allegorically or however you read them, they do suggest something of God taking time.
Well, why does God use history to achieve His purposes? Why not just have created everything right to begin with, and then if it were made wrong at a point in time by Adam and Eve falling, why not just have Christ die right there in the garden and have salvation? Why wait thousands of years for the revolution of Christ? And we don't get to have the answer to that.
That shows us that God is patient and subtle, that God is prepared to create through process, unfolding process, rather than through just divine magic decree.
If you believe that every kind of living organism was supernaturally created by God, then in one sense, every organism is unique. And the cheetah is the fastest organism, and the redwood tree is the largest organism, and they were all specially and supernaturally and distinctly created by God. They're all unique. If you believe in common descent and believe in evolutionary theory, then there's a sense in which no organisms are unique to the extent that they can be explained by the common mechanism of mutation and selection. When we look at human beings do things that, as of yet, are actually not adequately explainable by the common mechanism of genetic mutation and natural selection.
What Mother Teresa did on the streets of Calcutta is not evolutionarily useful. It's taking limited resources and giving them to people who are dying. That's not, from a survival point of view, useful. And yet most of us think it's rather a good thing.
This is not a God of the gaps argument, attempting to prove that there's a miracle or supernatural causes at work. That actually might be the case, but it might also be the case that there are natural causes at work, not operating in other organisms, unique to human beings. Right now, evolutionary theory actually gives content to and illuminates the reality of human uniqueness. E.O. Wilson says this capacity that humans have for unusual degrees of cooperative sacrifice is the culminating mystery of all biology.
So when we talk about evolution, it's really not a matter of death and destruction imposed upon humanity in all forms of life. Evolution, from a geneticist standpoint, is really a game about probability and potential and hope and possibilities. The same thing that the New Testament says that Christians should be all about.
Colossians, it tells us, in Him all things hold together. I think God's creation is continuing to unfold. As it continues to unfold and we have new species that are being generated, that's not in absence of God's creative power. Creation it's not this one-time deal in the past. God is intricately involved now.
There is a fabulous and profound thematic continuity to the history of life. For example, the transition from primitive prokaryotic cells to eukaryotic cells, the transition from single cells to multi-cells, the transition from asexual, basically clonally, individually reproducing organisms to sexually reproducing organisms that have to do it together, the transition from individual to social organisms. Well, there's really no other way to put this. It is progressive. It's exactly what we would expect. If a God who we already believe on the basis of the sacred history of redemption described in Scripture is also involved in incrementally achieving his purposes over the entire course of history.
And when you come to think about it, if the nature of God is love, as Christians believe, then I think that's the way you would expect the God of love to create. Not through just brute power, but by the unfolding of a fruitful potentiality.
People think, because of scientific evidence, my Christian faith doesn't stack up anymore. That day needs to end. All the richness in life that I know is because of my relationship with God. So I don't want people to miss out on that. I don't want people abandoning the faith because they find out that evolution is really real. It's God's truth. And so here we have this segment, this all-important segment of God's people who are out of touch with God's reality. I mean, it's God's universe. This natural world is God's creation. And so the people who especially need to be in touch with God's reality are often in a corner